Australia.
Hi Anna,
Hello!
what are you doing?
Well, isn't it obvious? I am the Queen, which means that I make all the rules of Australia. Everybody must listen to me. You go get a glass of water.
I'm not too sure if Australia runs this way. So how about we find out how Australia really runs?
All right, if you say so.
The government of Australia is based off a democratic system, meaning that citizens in Australia are able to freely vote and have a say in who they want to run the government. The Australian democratic system is based off the British Palace of Westminster model since mid-1800s. This means that Australian government is a bit similar to the British government. So, both systems form a parliament to represent the monarchy. In England, this is the king or queen, but in Australia we have a governor-general. Both parliaments are elected by the people to create laws and amend them. Leaders are called Prime Minister, they both have a speaker, and both parliaments have two houses, one red and one green. In Australia, the red house is called the Senate, and the green house is called the House of Representatives.
If we take a closer look at the key features and institutions of Australia's democratic system, we can see that this democratic system is defined by the Constitution, a special book that makes rules for the government. The power that the Constitution holds is split into three powers of government, to stop leaders from abusing power. The first power is the legislative power, which is where laws are made. This consists of the House of Representatives and the Senate. The House of Representatives involves members elected through preferential voting to propose or amend existing laws. Most members belong to a political party, and the biggest two parties in Australia are the Liberal and Labor parties. The other house is the Senate, which consists of 76 senators, where 12 represent each state and 2 represent each territory. These senators represent what Australia believes. The role of the Senate is to check and amend laws passed by the House of Representatives to make sure that the laws agree with the Constitution and what the Australian people want.
The next power is the executive power, which talks about how laws are enforced. In the executive power, there is a ministry. This involves the Prime Minister, the head of government, cabinet, senior ministers chosen by the Prime Minister, and ministers and secretaries who have special jobs to make sure everything runs smoothly. Then, we have the Governor-General, who acts on behalf of the Queen of England. They appoint and dismiss ministers and judges, decides when Parliament meets, and also approves laws made by the both houses. And lastly, we have government departments, who provide ministerial advice to the Governor-General.
The last power is judicial power. This is where there is power to interpret laws and to judge whether these laws apply to various issues in the Australian government. The judicial power consists of the High Court, where judges will interpret whether new laws or amendments to existing laws abide by the Constitution. Now we will look at how people choose their parliament. The Australian government is formed by electors, choosing representatives to make decisions for them. To be an elector, you must be at least 18 years old and an Australian citizen. All people who meet these requirements must vote. It's not a choice. All electors live in an electorate, which is a special area based on where people live and how many people live near them. There is about the same number of people living in each electorate, and there are 151 electorates in total at the moment, but this could change.
Electors are responsible to make sure their enrolment is up to date. When an election approaches, a responsible elector should consider what candidates want to be elected in their area. They must also consider if they can make it to a polling booth on election day. If they can't, they will need to apply to do a postal vote. On election day, candidates who have not already voted should go to a polling booth. A polling booth can be a church, school, community centre, or another common area. There may be candidate workers trying to convince people to vote for a certain person or party outside the polling booth. However, they are not allowed inside. Once inside, an elector needs to show appropriate identification such as a driver's license. An election worker will mark their name off the roll to make sure they only vote once. In a federal election, electors must fill in 2 different papers, a long white paper for the Senate, which we learnt earlier. The Senate paper is the same for all the electorates in the state. Electors have 2 choices on how to vote. They can vote above the line for a preferred political party or below the line for individual candidates. In both cases, electors must use numbers to show who their most preferred to least preferred candidates are.
In a federal election, electors must also vote for the House of Representatives. This paper is much smaller than the Senate paper and is different in each electorate. This paper is green and electors must number all the boxes provided. The responsibilities of the representatives are written in the name. They are chosen to represent. But this is a bit confusing because they need to represent both the people of Australia, and for most candidates they also need to represent their political party. Sometimes this can result in fights, but the important thing to remember is that representatives represent, because we can't all talk every time we need to make a decision in Australia.
Well, that was utterly fascinating, don't
It
you
sure
think?
was.
It appears that even as the Queen, I don't have all the power. May as well take off my crown.
May as well.